mean, just to recap, one of the goals from the AISB perspective and Aladdin and my perspective is that we were looking at, to celebrate the Turing centenary in 2012, what we were hoping to do is have the results, have some results to report back on and think about at the AISB meeting at 2011, such that in this meeting next year, we'll have the results of 2, 3 or 4 tests, in quotes, that will have been played with, even in a very rough and ready form over the years, so that we can then feedback from that and come up with something that in 2012 we could launch, or with some fanfare, as yes, this is a new test for the new millennium. That was initially part of the proposal and our thinking. Now, people might disagree and think of better ways to move forward, but that was the original sort of motivation for this.
So, yes. So that's one. So if we can start bringing our discussion, I mean, there are a few trends came out in the previous session. If we can bring these trends in a more concentrated way, and then if we can decide whether we have 2, 3 rough specifications for tests to see if people like to run them, or some general specifications, so we ask the community. Because some of these, like, for example, the virtual reality proposal, we found there is some form of it already in existence. Mm-hmm. So those people might have something ready to bring on to the table for next year. Mm-hmm. So that's probably the focus of the discussion now, to kind of summarize and leading to, the way I can summarize from, or can see from the last session, we have the people who would like to see graded or kind of progressive tests, going from very, very simple and going upward, preferably with some metrics. There are people who would like unrestricted tests, which might be fulfilled by virtual reality or beyond. There are people who think natural language is a very important aspect of it. So did I miss any of the major trends?
Well, I guess there was the re-evaluating the original Turing test. So I guess that would keep you in the loop, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, re-evaluating the Turing test, okay.
But isn't that part of the whole symposium purpose? Is to surely the idea, if you're going to propose a replacement, then that's all about re-evaluating the original Turing test, isn't it?
Yeah.
I would add the level of the element of immediacy of real-time multimodal interaction.
Okay.
I don't think that's covered by any of the things that you just mentioned.
Not explicitly, possibly.
Right.
Yeah. But do you include or exclude natural language?
But that's a separate dimension.
Okay.
So it can be real-time and natural language, theoretically.
Okay.
Well, we can list dimensions, but we also have to pick points in the space that is a package of features that makes a coherent test. You know, it's like natural language, virtual world, etc., as opposed to natural language compete with humans, or, you know, I forgot the dimension of there's a winner versus the two are indistinguishable or something like that. I'm not sure how to put it, but there are different packages in there. One of them is classic Turing test, and then so we have to pick a couple of coherent packages.
Yeah. I think I will say as well at this point that Alessio mentioned the idea of images, and I know we've talked a little bit about this, but he was interested particularly in the qualia and things within images, if you saw his presentation. So that was the aspect that he was particularly interested in. So he was interested in how an AI system might pick out individuals in an image and, you know, recognise the interrogator and that kind of thing, and various aspects about people in images and that sort of stuff. So I haven't done very much justice to it there, but there is that image processing idea as well from him that I said I would relate to the group. So.
Well, I guess building on from that, there's something that's very topical, I suppose, in wider society, we could possibly think about something about assessment of mood or motivation from, I'm sure things like this are already running, and there have been episodic awards in this area, but assessing mood or motivation of people from their gait or something like that, which is a human type of skill that can be said to involve a type of intelligence.
Mm-hmm. We did talk about the potential for using things like YouTube as a set of, or video anyway, you could sample from that set perhaps and ask the machine different questions about what was happening in that video. But again, that could be gate, and it could be a restricted set, which could be gate. Or
I suppose now we have sorry, I've spoken without being asked, but we have the YouTube closed captioning system, so we've got access to text of what people are saying on YouTube videos. Automatically captioned.
Well, one thing is you can just have sort of a Turing test sort of environment with audio visual input, which I'm all in favor of, and get rid of the human and forget the comparison and just have somebody rank it. Is this very intelligent and stupid and leave it at that? I mean, Turing had as his highest criterion that it was indistinguishable, and that's the Loebner Prize because it's the Turing test. But I don't think you would have to say that that the Turing test is the only test of intelligence. We're all coming. The purpose of this panel is to come up with alternatives. One of them is just to do this simple Turing test, however you want to do it, but just give it to the human and just have the judge rank them. I mean, it's there. I mean, anybody can do it. I can tell you, I've got the protocol if you want. It's not necessarily the good one, but it certainly is quick and easy, quick and dirty, or quick and easy.
Well, here's some.
So I have just 2 points to throw into the discussion for consideration. The first one, and actually inspired by a movie where robots are specialized. There's the butler robot, the Joker robot. Should we or could we have some form of specialization and then testing the intelligence of that entity or agent or system based on that? So if I have a Joker robot, is it intelligent because it can tell me jokes and so on, or can display the personality of that? That's one point which probably relate more to personality. The second point, can or should we include in the test that machines to be tested as machines? So what we provide, and probably relate to Rob's IQ test, is a protocol or a criteria for people when they interact with a piece of software to decide whether it is intelligent or not, but they are actually interacting with that software as a software. And I don't know the answers for these, but these for the discussions.
I was going to say, as I mentioned before, if you have a Joker robot or a Joker program, it'll be rated quite human. That's a very strong positive. The winning programs, a few of the winning programs that told jokes were successful, I think, because they told jokes. Jason Hutchins said the contest was worthless because he won it by telling jokes. But I said, well, you learned something. That's what
You should have a comedian on your panel.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. Thank you.
Because
That's a good point.
they know a good joke when they hear it.
Right.
And then steal it.
Although it's the respondent, but sure. I mean, maybe a comedian as the human.
Yeah. Mark?
No, I waved my hand around by mistake.
One of the things I had been thinking is that a possible test for this year, a possible experiment for this year, would be to find some organizations that have marketing software that helps them develop a customer base and develop preferences in a customer base. Probably the interface would include people in the organization, not just the machinery, if we could get consent to participate at all. Okay. So I'd be happier not having too much of a restriction on what the interface has to be for a test to be an acceptable proposal.
I must add to my earlier list of trends is testing organizations and collective intelligence. But this is an interesting point that you want the entity to be augmented, so it could be a machine, could be a human, and all-inclusive.
Could be an organization.
That's a point to be discussed. Yeah, anyway.
Another possibility, I think, is that I don't know whether I can get participation, but I know a couple of people who work on cognitive robots that do adversarial reasoning, try to figure out what somebody else will do. And that test that I proposed of having it try it with a game where you know what the adversary will do because that's computer programmed somewhere, that's a real test, and that's a real possibility. I just don't know whether the people I know who do it want to do it out in the open.
Right. Something we talked about with Drew and coffee was Drew and Mark was the idea of although the bot prize has already been done and it's in a very sort of constrained environment where you're or where the actor has to go around shooting things, whether or not we might try something that actually resembles real life a little bit more unconstrained, as Mark was saying. So the idea came as whether or not we might use something like Second Life or an online community-based project, something like that, where maybe the agent would have to try and survive in that kind of environment and build up its system from where, obviously from what it starts off with to actually try and build up its the houses and things that you can do in that, but whilst interacting with other individuals, actual human individuals in that system. Drew obviously made the point that it would be very difficult to make that purely scientific because every experience of every agent would be slightly different. But yeah, I assume that might be the same for the virtual tournament thing.
It's no worse than the Turing tester.
But isn't each experience is part of our intelligence as individual humans?
It's not, in principle, yes, you'd want to run it for a long time and see how well they do, but to make it more practical, I think you'd want an isolated environment within Second Life, which I think you can do to some extent. You'd like to be able to set up puzzles of various kinds. If you're interested in adversarial situations, you should set up a game and let two agents compete at the same time. You could have social interaction. You could have things where you're trying to persuade people, the way Doug was talking about earlier. Lots of things you could do in that environment. I think it's very interesting. Even though none of us apparently actually knows much about the interface of the API, that is a problem.
But the nice thing about that you actually do have API to start with. So people who working with they don't have to build everything from scratch. The focus will be building on the intelligence algorithms within.
Right.
So personally, I like this idea.
Well, you suggested avatars, so I mean that's the same.
So since we seem to be relatively in agreement that it's a more interesting task to focus on general, unconstrained intelligence, and at the same time, I mean, at least I would like to avoid a good chance for entries that are tuned to the specificities of the actual task as being documented. I wonder what is the way out of this dilemma, and so is it clear what the problem is? Let's say the task was being able to lift as quickly as possible a brick, or being able to reply to, being able to formulate a limerick or whatever. Yeah. So some specific task. If that was the case, then you could prepare for it. You could hard code that.
What if you tell people it's you're going to be tested on several things? The first will be limericks. The others you will be told.
Then you can hard
code the others you will be told.
Properties of limericks.
The others you will be told when you get there. So,
So I was heading in a different direction. I was thinking general intelligence means that you're able to adapt to a new environment in a reasonable amount of time, or that you're able to adapt to the new environment at all. So how about not documenting what the task will be, just the domain in which it will be, like finding a way in an unknown kind of environment without drowning or whatever, and then letting participants explore that space for a given amount of period, but without being allowed to change their software.
Yes.
So there would be a learning phase. That's my key point.
Right. Okay, Mark, and then your please.
Quick remark about the idea that we get a computer to compose a limerick. a guy called Matthew Fuller recently was involved in a project to emulate the Manchester baby, and one of the first applications, I believe, on the Manchester baby was a love letter and love poem application. And that's, if you do a search on Google on the web, you can see some of those early poems, and they are definitely well worth a read. So I think that's kind of been done, I think, that sort of poetry, in one form anyway.
So on the subject of this domain generality and so on, tasks, getting back to animals, again, non-human animals, it's interesting that animals really don't have all that many tasks. I mean, it's basically, you know, find food, reproduce, and avoid getting killed or injured. And as far as animal cognition researchers are concerned, who want to test all kinds of aspects of cognition and have a whole battery of tests for these kinds of things, they generally only use one of those, which is find food or water, find some kind of, you know, reward. And based on that, just that one thing, you know, that's all animals do, right? It's from what the bit that they explore, just get food. And they can explore well, yeah, but I mean, okay. Let's try and concentrate on the experiments that don't involve, you know, giving the animals electric shocks, but giving them rewards and stuff.
Yeah, right.
So based on that one simple task, just get your food reward, they can explore many aspects of cognition. And the very interesting thing is that the animals don't require to be programmed in any application-specific way. They are domain general. Intelligences, and that is what makes them real intelligences, I think, in my view. So I have a proposal, actually, which is in something like Second Life. You could make things that just have to accumulate as many small red balls as they possibly can, and then you'd be amazed the number of different tests you could arrange around that simple kind of thing.
Okay. Drew, and then I'd like to comment.
Just the fact that it's often very difficult to convey to the animal what the task is you'd like to tease out, and whereas with a person you can just say, I want you to focus on the way it appears, not what you actually know, or something like this. And so that's the advantage of natural language.
Can I add? Can I make a comment which might actually expand on what Murray said? I remember when I did my master's degree, one of the examples of distributed artificial intelligence was ecological simulation, and it was about primitive, not necessarily early human colonies where villagers were fishing. And actually, if you think about human behavior within that context, it's very similar to animal behavior. It would be very interesting if within that virtual environment have humans and animals doing very much the same and distinguish which one was a machine and which one was a human, where a human might control an animal or a human, because in the end you'll have humans hunting for food, animal hunting for food, animal hunting humans, human running, animal running from humans. Actually, in behavior level, all of them doing exactly the same thing. So I don't know if I'm just throwing...
If the animals are controlled by humans.
Some of those animals could be controlled by humans, if we want to.
That's...
Because in the end of the day, they trigger the same behavior.
No, but then the only advantage of being... There wouldn't be any advantage to being human. Well, I guess you could the opposable thumbs would be an advantage.
Yeah.
The pigs would be trying to use tools.
Sounds like a Larson card.
This relates to the point, just a clarification I want to make with respect to Murray's proposal. It isn't altogether clear to me that in general across the animal spectrum all animals generate context-independent intelligent behaviour. It seems they're very attuned to exploiting particular niches.
Sure.
So if we put a unclothed human on in the South Pole, then I wouldn't expect even someone as fat as me wouldn't last very long. But equally well, if you put a chimpanzee in the middle of a city, I don't know, perhaps actually that's not a good example, because in India I've seen chimpanzees doing very well in cities. But I can imagine if you took some wild animal and put it in a human environment, that it might not fare so well. So the point I wanted to make was that seems to be that animals have evolved to exploit particular niches.
Yeah, sure.
However, there's a story about there's a coyote in New Zealand that's apparently doing very well.
I just about Mark's comment. Your test sounded more and more like the DARPA Grand Challenge, I thought, because they don't give the systems, the waypoints, the actual route that they're going to take around the desert until they actually get out there, and it's about 5 minutes before, so you don't have the opportunity to plan that. So the obstacle avoidance and the ability to negotiate the terrain has to be on board, and they can use GPS and things, but they're only given the actual route very, a matter of minutes before.
Mark?
I give them the route.
Yeah, well, I don't know. That's what they do.
John?
On a sort of another line of thought, although I can dream up some reasons why we might want a replacement Turing test, so I'm not sceptical about that task, it might be helpful as an outcome of this to spell out what it is about the existing Turing test that's inadequate. It still stands, perhaps with more minutes or something, different percentages, and those parameters could be adjusted. But I mean, basically, the idea of it surely still stands as a if something could really pass this, engage in intelligent conversation for a whole day with a human being and not be detected as being a machine. That's still a pretty stiff test. So it's not clear to me, exactly what the motives are for producing a replacement test, whether it's you want to test more aspects of intelligence than the existing Turing test tests. Is that the motive? Or is to test the things it purportedly tests better?
It's to test,
or what?
It's to be able to test progress towards general intelligence by taking things that aren't particularly intelligent, but being able to rank them.
Okay, well, I agree with that mode. I think having sort of ranking and comparing machines with each other rather than necessarily with a human being, I think that's all great. But I mean, that as an outcome of this workshop seems to me just as valuable as specific tests that do that. But, a decision like should it be in a virtual world, or what should be the task, or should it involve images or not involve images, actually that seems to me less important than questions like, do we want to compare machines with each other? Is the goal to inspire more work over the next 20 years to get better AI? Or is the goal to somehow clarify our notions of intelligence? Or is the goal to somehow engage in public engagement work and sort of get the public more engaged? Those are all sort of reasonable possible goals. I'm personally not clear.
That's probably a question if bring it to the panel. I mean, I have particular views, but probably goes to the panel. And just on one of the things you mentioned, an alternative test. That alternative test doesn't necessarily mean we are giving up the Turing test completely. It might be an enhancement.
Right.
For example, grading of systems, or a change of some of the protocols of the test, like testing machines against each other. Or reversing the test, where a machine can tell us whether it is a human or a machine.
And Marius thing about animals and the thing about child development, I think that's all very valuable. And those principles seem to me more valuable, perhaps, than trying to decide now what even a rough specification for a test should look like. It's more solidifying the aims of the testing seem to me more important right now than actually coming up with even a rough specification for a new test.
I think one of the aims we're trying to do is to translate some of these aims or major points into how they might translate into a specifications of a test. But I agree with you, we probably wouldn't be able to get that. But shall we go around the panel to see, in your opinion, what is, if there is any major flaw, missing point, or something you like to enhance, or reason to replace the Turing test as a whole? So Shall we start from Ed?
I think, yeah, we've pretty much covered this. I think it's just generally unhelpful for developing that final system. So developing an intelligent system, it doesn't help us get there. It is ultimately, no doubt, a really concrete and sufficient test for intelligence, in my opinion. But the problem is, how do we actually get anywhere near it? I don't think we have so far in the intervening 60 years. And I think we ought to think of a system that does.
John?
Could you come to me last? Sorry.
Okay, that's Drew?
Well, I think we've identified two local minima in the space. One is the original test. The problem is that we may not, no program may pass it in our lifetimes. It would be very depressing, but possibly true. And whereas there's this other point, I think, which is I would endorse the artificial world, natural language interface that would measure general intelligence, trying to avoid hacks or narrowly focused programs, would measure progress toward general intelligence and might fill that gap that we were talking about.
Okay, Rob?
Just to add what I said before, I think the goal is important, the discussions that we had here too. What's the purpose of the test? And to identify that up early is going to define how we approach to either revise it or deal with it. So I think that's an important area to deal with. That's all.
Okay.
So I think the problems with the original test, from my point of view, are the three obvious ones that I can think of are that it's not graded. It's a binary kind of decision. There's not enough emphasis on embodiment, or there's no emphasis on embodiment, and there's too much emphasis on natural language. That's my view.
I'm kind of sceptical about the notion of whether we can design a test, a behaviouristic test, that would determine whether a machine can really be said to think. Nonetheless, I think the idea of a test to stimulate research in AI is exciting. I'm not convinced we've completely got to the bottom of all that can be explored from something along the lines of the original Turing test, albeit if we want to go down that route, I'd like to explore to make it more usable to the community, I'd like to explore some sort of graduation of response. So that's sort of one avenue that interests me, sort of looking at whether we can finesse the Turing test to be more useful to the AI community, or whether we can't and it should just be ditched, as I think Drew was suggesting this morning. The other, on an alternative means altogether is I'm pretty well in sympathy with the proposal that Drew put together of a virtual world with a natural language interface, and asking a bot to do something, an unconstrained task that clearly would be said to involve intelligence.
Well, I agree with Drew that we need to fill the gap of general intelligence, because this is what outside academia everybody says, no, computers won't have it and don't have it and we cannot measure it and etc. And I would like to propose AI Olympics to fit all the, like linguistics or cognitive or any approaches to gather together and see, if we see the problems of like different approaches, then we can maybe bring something new to our approach. So if there is a virtual world and I do only like linguistics, then I can like borrow some ideas and give some ideas, and I would like to meet people from different approaches and get the gold medal.
AI Olympics with guaranteed gold medal to him. I like the AI Olympics. I'm not sure about the gold medal though.
Well, this meeting has been an eye-opener for me. I mean, my views are completely been revised, and I'd like to announce the Lomna Prize is cancelled. No, just kidding. Just kidding, folks. I'm not, as you might imagine, I have a pretty strong commitment to the Turing test. I don't particularly see that it's the test itself that's so much of an impediment to as the lack of enthusiasm on the part of the AI community in working towards it. I mean, I don't see it. I mean, I'm not going to get down on my knees and beg you folks to have your students enter it, but I don't see many academic groups entering it, and I mean, there's a prize there, and it's a salad days. Let me tell you, the entries are pretty lousy. But maybe it's me. That could be a little bit. But the test itself, that's an ad hominem argument. But that's sometimes they're very useful and very deplorable. But I don't particularly understand why the Turing test is itself such an impediment. I mean, I don't see very much work doing on it. You know, they think, well, it's just pattern matching, right? I agree, but I don't like it. I mean, I'm not. I tell you, I get all. Why is it pattern matching? It's lousy. It's a lousy test. It's a worthless. Sorry, it's a worthless test. It's nothing but pattern matching. I said, well, don't do pattern matching. So that's it. I mean, grading it's simple. I mean, having grading, I do it every year. I mean, just which is the most human. That's it. But that means you have alternate. You know, it's a pretty much almost a complete factorial in its own way, and somebody wins. But you can also, if you want to make it simpler, use either human children as the whatever. Something. Anyway, that's my particular view. But I would say if you want to advance it, start getting your students to work on it, or don't talk about changing the test. Start changing the energy.
Okay.
Right. Well, several things, actually. So I stand by my original suggestion that it would be good to have something real-time, multimodal interaction and capable of showing some emotional and social capabilities. In addition, through the discussion, I think I am now more clearly than before skeptical of natural language. So it's nice to disagree on this point, because I think it's too tough with today's technology to do this in a non-arbitrary way. So this issue of symbol grounding, coupled with the requirement to have general domain, I think it's absolutely unsolvable at this stage. Not in principle. So in principle, it might end up being something like the Turing test being the right thing to do, but with today's technology and with the aim of advancing today's technology, I'm skeptical. So that's why I think it would be more promising to start with something less ambitious, maybe several domain-specific things that, however, are grounded in a generic understanding of the cognitive system and what it means, water, or whatever concept.
Okay.
Well, as you know, I came in trying to answer the question, can we find a replacement for the Turing test? The question of whether we need to replace the Turing test seems to be unsettled as of the moment. But certainly we can agree that other tests, either instead of or in addition to the Turing test, offer us some insight that the Turing test is unlikely to offer during at least my lifetime. Some of you are younger than I am. Most of you are younger than I am. But in particular, when we start thinking about intelligence as something that is not necessarily in a human or in a specific kind of machine, when we start trying to generalize a little bit more and be a little less trapped by assumptions about where intelligence can reside, I think there are other things we can do, and I think I see a few of them that are fairly promising.
Thank you. John?
Yeah, I feel one problem with the Turing test is not in the test itself or anything to your Turing test or anything like that, but simply my observation is the public seems to have got hold of the idea that AI people think that they're just about to produce something incredibly intelligent. They see this test being done. They assume from the fact that the test is being done and what little they know about the test as such, that somehow claims are being made that aren't being made. And so there's a problem of public perception, which may be more important to surmount than some of the other things we've been talking about, perhaps. But one thing that could help with that is this idea of ranking machines against each other, rather than purporting to come up with testing a machine against a human, which we may be just too early for that. And talking about we're trying to assess progress towards general intelligence might help to dispel some of the hype that the public, the overblown expectations that the public sometimes seems to have come up with, or journalists have come up with, or whoever. So I'd go with the comparison between machines idea strongly for that reason. I also think that introducing multimodal things could help to make the public see that this is a valid testing scenario that does test something like general intelligence, because it does go beyond natural language. I think perhaps it is important to go beyond natural language for that reason. But at the same time, doing multimodal stuff is itself incredibly difficult. I mean, just to say multimodal and get away from natural language doesn't ease the problem. I mean, if you're going to get machines to draw diagrams and understand pictures and pick up emotion from facial expressions and know how to talk to people in an emotionally sensitive way, that's all just as difficult as doing natural language. So the question is, the limitation of the task is the key, I think, to getting over the problem you're talking about. Not the question about whether it's natural language or vision or emotion or whatever. I mean, I think those things are very important. But it's the task limitation that's important.
Thank you, John.
Yeah.
Mark, and then Doug.
Yeah, just to follow up from John's point there, in discussion with Hugh yesterday, we both observed that there hasn't been significant, or both agreed that there hasn't been a huge significant increase in the quality of winning entries to the Lerner Prize over the last 17 years. I'd even go further, and for those of us in the room who saw the demonstration today on emotionally sensitive avatars, or whatever it was called, that thing just reminded me of Eliza Revisited. And I mean, the fact there hasn't been any progress in 15 years, you might as well say there hasn't been much progress in chatbot technology in probably the last 40 years. And I really do come back to this point of what is that telling us about this problem.
Doug, and then I can see a comment coming from you in a minute. Doug.
Well, you remind me of an interesting point. You say that the public doesn't know what's near and what's far in AI. I don't think we know.
Well, okay.
I've certainly been surprised enough times by what was easy, what was hard, and then what got solved. I can remember back to when visual recognition was a very hard problem for robotics, and realistic leg movement was a very hard problem for robotics. And it was actually, at one time, thought that the vision problem would be solved before the leg movement problem, because the leg movement problem was so difficult. Chess looked difficult. Checkers looked easier. Go, I think, still looks very, very difficult. But, life is full of surprises in science, and something looks impossible until somebody solves it, and then everybody has to reconsider.
I was just going to say, as far as vision recognition is concerned, Picasso can pick out people from the pictures.
Yeah, the camera, facial recognition stuff. Somebody told me it can even.
It tells smiles. I mean, I've got a camera. My camera, I think it'll know what, or at least you could. There are cameras where you point it and it knows who's the important person, and it won't take a picture unless that person is smiling, and his eyes are open, or her eyes are open. And Picasso, you can, it went through it. I gave it a number of people. It went through maybe 10 photos, naming this was, Joan, then boom, this is Joan, and everyone was right. And some of them were pretty, let me tell you, some of them were really different visions. I mean, they were half faces, profiles. I mean, it was not as if it's just, a mugshot. These were taken in a natural setting with different backgrounds.
Well, great things have been done with vision. I hope you're not taking me to say anything against what you're being saying. But it's more like some of the early pre-processing stages of natural language, as opposed to extracting meaning from natural language.
It wasn't all that long ago that a system could not tell that it was the same face with a different expression on it.
Couldn't tell it was a face.
No, could tell it was a face, but couldn't tell it was the same person, which a 2-month-old baby can do.
10 minutes. I like the idea John started specifying the key element. One key element about the Turing test I like your opinion about is the blind test. Personally, I'm not comfortable with that. And if we are going to put conditions for any test specifications to be handed, personally, I like to make it a condition that there's no blind test. You remove that blind test either by having avatars in virtual reality or by allowing the test to test the machine as a machine. That blind test It's just I'm very uncomfortable with, and I think one of the weakness of the Turing test, because that doesn't allow us to examine what I like to call integrative intelligence. Our intelligence is the whole of us, and if we don't have that whole, I'm not comfortable. So I don't know what.
But why? I don't understand. I don't understand that. What is wrong with not having a blind test there? I just don't understand that.
I'm not understanding either. When you were saying that you thought we ought to allow alternatives to the blind test, I was with you. Now I'm hearing you say that you want to eliminate the blind test, and I don't see why.
Because the blind test allow us to test part of the intelligence. So you get objections like the embodiment problem, you don't have the embodiment, and it doesn't allow us to test the whole entity as a full entity. So either we have it as simulated entity in a virtual reality, or we test machines as machines.
But what you get with the blind test, and with the problem you avoid, is the halo effect, where a certain person, because he or she may be more attractive or more distinguished, is considered the more intelligent, when in fact they're not.
But in
really, that's that's a real thing. You say this person looks intelligent, strong chin, bright eyes, whatever. No, really, I'm not kidding you. I mean, I've walked down the street. Are you a professor? But in that case, they're right. Of course, I was. But so you have a sort of like a double blind there. You don't know the confusion of the appearance.
But in estimating our human intelligence, maybe that's part of it.
Well, I don't think humans are very intelligent anyway. That's the real problem with the Turing test. That's the real problem with the Turing test is it assumes humans are intelligent. Let me tell you, after watching some of the shenanigans.
Sorry, Drew, were you about to...
I'm sorry, every time I move my eyebrows, I...
Okay.
Like an auctioneer. Yes.
I failed the test. I can't detect it.
He's got you trained.
I've half a mind to, actually, I think it's probably the opposite of what you're saying almost.
Yes.
I still quite like the idea of the original imitation game, where it's not a question of overtly judging whether something is a machine versus a human. The judge thinks that they're both humans, perhaps, but the machine has to do well as at something as some other entity has to do. And as far as the judge is concerned, they can be both human. It's just simply judging performance on that task.
Okay.
Right. And then you get rid of this whole question of people's prejudices about what machines can do and what humans can do. You're just trying to judge something that the judge thinks is a human on some task. And I think, not to the exclusion of any other type of test, but I still feel that's a valuable type of test to do.
There is a test, the CatBot. Okay, the CatBot actually has programs against programs. Yeah, I should point out that the creator created it and then won the first two when there was no follow-up on who the judges were. But that's another matter. Calls there his gold medal, even though it's not gold. But aside from that, but there is that contest right now.
Okay.
It's called, I think, the CatBot contest, but it really hasn't gotten too much because it's not a Turing test, and also because the judging is a little problematic.
But the judges are judging as
Yes.
But I mean judging. Yeah. Okay.
But I mean,
Perhaps
they still are ranking chatbots against chatbots.
Yeah.
Yes. Now I do have a comment. Just to clarify about natural language in the context of the kind of competition I'm thinking of, unlike the Turing test where it's a quiz and you want to trip up the contestants, I'm thinking of I'd like there to be situations where the judges or the human interlocutors are conveying information, and so they want to be cooperative. They're not trying to use complex grammatical constructions. They're trying to use the simplest ones that will get the point across.
So maybe the judges have a set of questions with set of information, and they make a cross-reference to things they may have said before to the machine?
They might do that. They might do lots of things, but the point is that they're trying to set up some guidelines or some new rules, things like this. But if they fail to communicate the new rules, it might be the bot's fault. But if you use some flowery language, you could fool almost anyone. And what's the point? You really want to try hard and see which ones fail and which ones succeed.
So the purpose of the natural language and what you're proposing, it really is the communication channel, right? It's a channel for communication of information as unambiguously and clearly as possible, right? So it's not really, it's not part of the whole imitation business. It's that it has that clear purpose.
Well, you might use it for asking questions, but you don't want to ask tricky. Well, you might ask tricky questions. It really depends on the level of intelligence and natural language competence you expect this year's contestants to have.
You might insist or ask for simple language, but the messages conveyed might be complex, even though the language itself is simple. Is that an aspect of what you're saying?
It might be complex in context or something. It's like only the smart ones will realize that when you say the blue block, it's the one they've just dug up. The others didn't realize it was blue until they dug it. They hadn't dug it up yet.
So it's the interaction with everything else that's complex, but the language itself might be simple formally.
Like that.
You could have a one-word language.
Very time to come to the close. So if we can kind of have an action list of what we would like to do to carry this work. Obviously, there are lots of ideas, and the discussion is wonderful, and we probably can stay here for another day. So